Hey everyone, and welcome to Ask an Astronomer Solo Edition. I'm Michael Unger. I'm the program coordinator here at the MacMillan Space Centre. And since this is a solo edition, I'm here with you, all of you joining here in YouTube. Hello to everyone. So this is just going to be a conversation between me and you. I've got a fabulous presentation set up. It's Perseid time. It's meteor madness. So I've got lots of fun stuff to talk to you about meteor showers, about the Perseids happening this week, as well as an Artemis update. So lots of stuff to get to. If you're here in YouTube and want to join the chat, throw some questions in. I'd love to have a conversation about anything that you're curious about, whether it's meteor showers, Artemis, or anything else that you're curious about, especially if you're looking up at the stars these days. We have an event tonight that I'm gearing up for here in the lovely unceded territory, the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. So lots going on, lots to get to. I'm glad that you're here joining us. If you are in telescopic, of course, and you're watching, join on here in YouTube every second Thursday at 2 p.m. So Perseid meteor shower, we're gearing up for it. It is my favorite time of year because it's a time to relax, get outside. It's usually good weather. And actually, we've been having some pretty good weather here in the lower mainland. And you can get out to some dark sky locations and look up at the stars. And that is one of my favorite things to do, regardless of any time. But it's great because it's usually good weather and you can stay out there for a long period of time and just look up at the stars and make a wish when something whizzes by. It's a very magical time. If you're here in YouTube, drop in the chat if you have ever wished upon a star that you saw streaking across the sky, a shooting star. What did you wish for? I'd love to hear what people's wishes are. Let me just get my screen sharing here and start to show you some images that Marley actually prepared. She's off today, but she helped me out here to prepare some images here. So let's go full screen because when we're talking about the meteor shower and we're talking about the Perseids, we're also talking about comets, which is really cool. We've got a nice image of a comet here, but why are we talking about meteor showers and comets in the same vein? Well, it's because a meteor shower is the remnants of a comet. Specifically, the Perseids is related to Comet 109P Swift-Tuttle, which you can see here, beautifully photographed by E.E. Barnard. Isn't that a great astronomer name? E.E. Barnard. And the classic image of a comet is really shown here. You got a bright nucleus, you got this really long tail. It is the harbinger of dragons if you watch Game of Thrones. So what's really going on here with this comet? So this image is actually a really great one to show what's happening here. You can't see what the nucleus is made of, but we now know because we've actually visited a comet, Comet 69P, when we landed on it. A comet is, you can think of as like a dirty snowball. That is a classic nomenclature of a comet because it is made of more gaseous, more icier materials, as opposed to, say, an asteroid. But we'll get into some terminology a little bit later on. But as you can see here in this photograph, it seems to have this like really long wispy tail, and that's because as it comes careening into the sun, it is outgassing that ice and some of that gas that has been trapped into that nucleus. And when that happens, it leaves this wake behind its trail. As you can see here, as that tail is going behind the comet, it is leaving this trail of tiny little pieces of rock and ice, and it is out there in space. And then when Earth passes through this wake, we get what we call a meteor shower. Now, if any of you are out there are new to this concept of a meteor shower, if you've never seen a meteor shower, I just want to set some expectations because language is important. We use the word shower, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same as if you were in your bathroom and the water is pouring over you. When you go out to a dark sky park, there's not all of a sudden going to be a shower of meteors falling all around you. The best that you'll probably be able to hope for this weekend would maybe be about like 100 an hour, but that is in really good conditions. one of the best places to go is Aldergrove Park. This weekend, I'm going to be there with some team members. The RESC, the Royal Astronomical Society, the Greater Vancouver Parks is putting on a big event at Aldergrove Regional Park. And it is a dark park. It is a great place to do stargazing. McDonald Park in Abbotsford is also a good place to go, because you need to get dark adapted. You need to be away from city lights and let your pupils get really big so they can see those meteors streak across the sky. Okay, so just to give you some context of what we're talking about here with Comet 109P Swift-Tuttle is that the comet is not passing by Earth from Perseids. It is long gone. It has come around the sun and left. It is part of our solar system, as you can see here in this orbital map here. We got all of our planets, but Comet 109P is on this really long elliptical orbit. And as you can see there, it stretches out to a place that we like to call the Oort cloud. Which is one of my favorite astronomical words, Oort, which is named after another classic astronomer, Astronomer Oort. And Comet Swift-Tuttle goes pretty much to that region, which is kind of almost the edge of the influence of the sun's gravitation. And comets like to linger out there, and we are now learning more about this very strange region. We've never, sent a spacecraft to that region. There's still a lot of unknowns about that region, but it is a place where these icy snowballs can really start to really start to build up a lot of that icy and gassy material because it's so cold out there. And then when they start to come in towards the sun, that's when they start to outgas off and give off a whole bunch of that material that the Earth passes through. So as you can see here, our orbital path, has a pretty standard and a pretty consistent path. So every time that we go through this path, it's the same time of year, which means that the Perseid meteor shower, which usually happens around this time, August 11th and 12th, this is when we get that heightened period of those meteors streaking across the sky. That's also to say that meteors, shooting stars, they happen all the time. Any night you could go out, you have a chance to see a meteor because our Earth is being hit by them all the time. But it just so happens that during these periods, these comet wakes that we know of, this is when we have our added increased activity. Okay, so I sent out a bunch of terminology for you. So just to clarify on a few things, because I said language is important, what we're talking about here. A meteoroid, this is actually something I actually learned not too recently. So a meteoroid is kind of like when that small particle that orbits the sun really actually becomes close to Earth, in like the Earth region. That's when we kind of consider it a meteoroid. Or you could also maybe call it a potential meteor, because once that meteoroid enters the Earth's atmosphere and starts to burn up, that's what we call a meteor or a shooting star, because of course it looks like a star streaking across the sky. But it's really just that piece of rock, that piece of ice that is burning up in our atmosphere, creating that nice bright light. And some of them will be brighter than others, that is because if they're larger, if they maybe have more dense material, they may be burning up. I did a webinar last night for a bunch of folks for Metro Vancouver, and a lot of them were wondering, do any of them land on Earth? Which some of them do, but they're very, very small. The chances of anyone being hit are absolutely remote. There used to be, thought that no one in history has ever been recorded to be hit by a meteor, although that may not be exactly true. There is a few reports that I've seen of maybe in history, there might be one or two people that have been hit. And then of course, if you remember from, I think it was last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, when we did an Ask an Astronomer about that woman in Golden, British Columbia, that her dog was barking. She went outside to see what her dog was barking at. She came back into her bedroom and there's a meteor sitting on the pillow that she was just laying on, which might be the closest time that anyone's ever been hit. But for the most part, any of these streaks of light that you see during the meteor shower, during this weekend, if they do land on Earth, they will be tiny, tiny little pieces of rock. Apparently you can pick them up though, if you do find them. And if you're curious, especially after the meteor shower, if you have a garden, if you go out with a magnet, and just run it along the garden, you might find some metallic pieces, which might have a good chance of being a meteorite, which is what we call that meteor when it actually hits the ground. So those three words, meteoroid, meteor, meteorite, language is important. But then we get to the asteroid comet debate, which some people get confused about, which really comes down to what the asteroid and the comet is made of, right? So the comet, as I described, mostly gas and water. Asteroid could also potentially have some gas and water in there, but is mostly made of denser materials, metals, and rocks. And both of these words, asteroids and comets, we're actually learning so much more about because we've actually sent spacecrafts to each of these places. Like I said, we landed on Comet 69P, and with Rosetta, that was the European Space Agency mission. And that one, it wasn't a complete failure. It didn't actually land the way it was supposed to, but it got a lot of information kind of bounced off of it. And mainly that was surprising because the density of the comet was a lot softer than we thought. With an asteroid, we've had missions. We have the Bennu mission that is coming back that has actually samples from the asteroid that is now currently on its way back to Earth. OSIRIS-REx, lots of Canadian scientists working on that mission, including Catherine Johnson, who has been a special guest with us many times before. So that's going to be very exciting. When those samples get back to Earth, we'll try to get Catherine on again, and that's going to help us learn more about what asteroids are made of, which we believe are more denser material. But one of the surprising things about going to asteroid Bennu was that it was more of like a rubble pile, more than just sort of like thinking like a big one solid rock. It was kind of like these little pieces kind of like clumped together because of gravity. So really, really interesting stuff there. So lots of stuff that I've kind of gone into: comets, asteroids, meteors, meteorites. If you have any questions, kind of like about any of that terminology, let me know in the chat. I've got some cool images here that Marley's put together. The path of the comet, that conveyor belt, which is sort of what the Earth goes through when we get to that period. And so that's to say, if I've got a calendar a bit later, but here are some tips if you want to go out this weekend. And essentially, tonight, tomorrow night, Saturday, Sunday, even like next week, you have a potential. The peak is really this weekend on Saturday. So where you're going to be looking for is this area around the constellation of Perseus. So that's where the name Perseids come from, is that they originate from the constellation of Perseus. So little stargazing tips here. Where is Perseus? Well, it is close, as you can see on the image on the left there, close to the constellation Cassiopeia. That classic W or 3 or M shape, Cassiopeia, all really bright stars, all ones that you can see in the northern part of the sky. So we call them circumpolar stars because they just do a big circle there over towards the north. It doesn't matter what time of year, what time of night, those constellations are always up. And so you're going to be looking there. You're going to be looking in this region, but really what you're wanting to do is just orient yourself in that direction when you're looking. So my suggestion is, when you do get to a dark park, and let's say you don't have time to like drive out of the city and you just want to get to your nearest park or beach so that you can maybe see a few. I would say that when I have gone to a local park near my apartment here in Vancouver, I've seen maybe 5 or 6 an hour, just to give you some relative expectations of how many you could potentially see if you're still in a light polluted city. So you even go to a dark park, you're going to see some, and you want to kind of orient yourself, your body. So if you're going to lay down on a blanket in the park, I would say orient yourself towards the north, Cassiopeia. And that's kind of like where they will seem to originate from, but they'll kind of be all around you. You kind of want to see as much sky as possible. The next tip is to let your eyes dark adapt, like I said before. So that's put away your phones. Make sure that if you're in that park, go to the middle of the park so the street lights are not in your vision. So as soon as that light from any of those street lights get into your eyes, your pupils are going to shrink back down. You want your pupils nice and big so that you can see more of those streaking lights across the sky. And if you're unfamiliar with, you're trying to find sort of like this area again, finding Cassiopeia, best place to do any stargazing again is to start with the Big Dipper. Really usually easy to find, and many of us adults maybe remember from our childhood. It's the exact same shape. These shapes have not changed since we were kids. If you're a kid watching, get out there and try to find the Big Dipper. It's actually part of a larger constellation called Ursa Major, the Big Bear. Some of those other stars that make up the Bear might be a bit dimmer, but the main Dipper part there, the soup ladle, as I like to call it, should be pretty easy to find. And you use those two stars in the Dipper there, and they'll point to the North Star, which is the end of the handle of the Little Dipper, Ursa Minor. And then once you're oriented towards Polaris, the North Star, that's when you're facing north, and Cassiopeia is just keep on going past the North Star, and there you have Cassiopeia, and then you found Perseus as well. And that's what you're looking for, and you just got to be patient. Patience is probably, as well as being a virtue, it is one of the best tips as well for finding shooting stars. And if you're thinking about what time of night, so anytime after sunset, you have a potential to see some. But if you really want to see that peak, you want to be in those sort of like pre-dawn hours after midnight, because that's when the Earth is heading straight in towards that conveyor belt. There'll be, meteors kind of like falling in around, as you can sort of picture the Earth kind of going through that conveyor belt. But it's right after midnight where it's sort of straight on towards that wake. That's when you'll see the most. But recognize that not everyone likes to stay up that late. Don't worry, you're going to have a chance to see a few. The peak being tomorrow night. Saturday is still going to be good as well. But as you can see here, we've got a bit of a problem happening, and that problem is the moon. And normally that's not a big problem, but the moon, of course, gives off lots of light pollution, and it just happens to be a supermoon tonight as well. So looking out tonight for our event, it's not going to be the best night to be doing some stargazing for those Perseid meteor showers, but it's going to be a great night to look at the moon. So we'll have our telescopes pointed at the moon for tonight, and we'll also give some tips on where to find that. And also Marley's going to be around a little bit later. We're going to do sort of like a deeper dive on what comets and asteroids are really about in our planetarium show tonight. So that's what's happening for the next few weeks. Drop into the chat any stuff that you're primed about as we get primed tonight. But there's one more thing that I wanted to get to, and that is a update on Artemis. So we talked about a little bit about this over the last couple of weeks. Artemis is launching on August the 29th. And what's interesting is that they have now opened up the astronaut class. So originally when Artemis was announced in 2020, they had this group of 18 that was going to be part of the so-called Artemis class, but they have now opened that up to a whole bunch of other astronauts as well. One of the other things that has kind of changed is, like all government agencies, updating to modern sensibilities can be a bit challenging. So in the past, astronauts were more weighted to males. And one of the reasons for that, besides the obvious ones, was that the radiation, it seemed, had less of effect on the male body as opposed to the female body. And Of course, radiation is a big concern for astronauts because you're out there beyond the protection of Earth's atmosphere. So when you're out there in space, you are going to be exposed to more radiation, and there's sort of like an upper limit to how much radiation a human body can withstand. As you're out there in space. So they've actually dropped that. And so now there is more equitable distribution between female and male astronauts for this Artemis mission. Now, remember, just a reminder, if you're unfamiliar with the Artemis mission, this is where astronauts will be going back to the moon. Artemis 1, which is going to be launching at the end of this month, will not have astronauts on it. It's just going to be doing the path, looping around the moon and around. Eventually, Artemis is going to be part of a larger mission to create the lunar gateway, which is going to be the new base that is going to be in orbit, as well as some remote stations over the course of the next 20, who knows how far into the future, really now setting up humanity to have these new outposts out on the moon, very similar to what we have in Antarctica and in other very extreme regions on Earth. And of course, if you've been following along, Canada has a big role in Artemis. We made some big contributions, just like we did with the International Space Station. We have contributed to some AI technology, a new Canadarm that's going to be built on the Lunar Gateway, which means we get to send Canadian astronauts as well. And so currently, we have 4 active Canadian astronauts, and at least one will be on one of those first Artemis missions, not the very first one, probably the second Artemis launch that is going to be orbiting around the moon. And so, of course, we've got David St. Jacques, who's already been on the International Space Station a few years ago. We've got Jeremy Hansen, Joshua Kutrick, and Jennifer Sidey-Gibbons, all 3 of them who have visited us here at the Space Center. You can probably actually find my interview with Joshua Kutrick a few years ago on Ask an Astronomer. And what's really fun is that Joshua is actually coming back to the Lower Mainland, is going to be here in person on October the 21st. So mark your calendars if you want to meet a Canadian astronaut. Joshua Kutrick is going to be here. That's going to be a really fun event. So all that's to say is that we've got 4 Canadians that are going to be going back to the moon. It's a very exciting time for space lovers, for Canadians to be thinking about space. Whenever I'm talking to kids and I'm talking about the potential of going and working in space, one of the big questions I always get asked is, what do I need to do to become an astronaut? Now, when I was a kid, one of the things that I would have needed to have done was probably, go into the military, because I would have learned a whole bunch of things that would led to a pathway to becoming an astronaut, because there's usually, you learn how to fly, you learn how to live remotely. There's all these things that go along with serving in the military that help you kind of prepare you for space. And NASA was the same way as well. If you go back to how they were selecting for their astronauts, they were kind of looking for this quote unquote right stuff. But that's kind of like totally out the window now. Astronauts are being pulled from all walks of life and all disciplines, because now we need more diversity and not just the humans that we're sending, but also the disciplines that they work in. So that means doctors, that means specialists and different kinds of engineers, computers, even artists. That is something that I'm actually really excited about, because with a lot of the private ventures going up into space, the more artistic minded people we send up there, the more that we get back. Just how art gives us back a way of being there. Artists just do a really good job of bringing us to that place, whether it's a movie or a song or a painting, whatever it is that their discipline is. So I'm excited to see some of those artists, lots of diverse astronauts. Put into the chat if you'd like to go up into space. I always ask this, because I always like seeing the wide variety of answers. And I'm just going to go check here. I haven't been checking any of the questions here. Hopefully all of you have been chatting away. It's just me solo, so I have to catch up on all of our questions here. October 21st. Yes, October 21st, Pride. And that's it for this edition of Ask Astronomer. If you have any last minute questions about anything that I've talked about, would love to chat about them over the last 5 minutes. Like I said, tonight we're going to be in person. We've only got a few tickets left. I think it's going to sell out tonight. So if you do want to come and learn more about comets and asteroids, that's really what our planetarium show is going to be about. Then we're going to go out to the observatory, and it's going to be a clear night. So we're going to be looking at the moon. We're going to be doing some actual stargazing with some laser pointers. That's going to be fun outside. And then if you want to get out to do some good Perseid watching, I'm going to be at the Aldergrove Regional Park on Saturday night with the team. We're going to be building some solar system headbands, but that's going to be one of the best places to view the Perseid meteor shower. Also McDonald Park in Abbotsford, or any dark park, any beach, wherever you're at. I wish you happy stargazing, happy Perseids. We will be back again for another edition of Ask an Astronomer in 2 weeks. Just looking at my calendar, that's looking like August the 25th. Thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.